Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Yes, it's the Ron Rivera Happy New Year edition. There is no Therapy Thursday needed. I don't know that we're going to need that for a while, at least not until the season starts. This is a terrific move by the Redskins, and I have David Newton here to talk about it. He covered Rivera in Carolina for ESPN, and he provides great insight. I also have Mike Jones from USA Today and the Football Jones podcast. Give Mike's podcast a listen. Mike has always had excellent knowledge, and he works his ass off. That's why he's always been one of my favorites. And then it's just me with my thoughts on the hire and other moves. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with David Newton. Now I'm going to bring in my ESPN counterpart in Carolina, David Newton, very familiar with Ron Rivera, having covered him for most of his tenure with the Panthers. And so, David, what are the Redskins getting in Ron Rivera?
I think they're getting a complete package with him. I mean, from what he can do on the field, I think he's a great defensive mind. He took over the defensive play calling here the last couple of years, trying to get things fixed because they had a really strong run defensively under him, but then they lost Sean McDermott, their defensive coordinator. They lost him to Buffalo, and you've seen how well he's turned out, and that hurt them moving forward. And they lost some other key coaches and all of that. So I think he's going to be great for the community. He's big in the military, so being near Reed Hospital and things like that, I think you're going to see a guy that's really going to be very active in those type things. And he's really good at assembling a good staff. I know Jack Del Rio is a guy that's been put out there that could be joining the staff. And I covered Jack Del Rio when he turned this defense around back in the early 2000s and helped him get to the Super Bowl in 2003. And Ron's really good at bringing in good people for that. And he's really a player's coach too. Players really like him. I mean, when a lot of times when a coach is fired, you hear players, not really complaining a lot because they feel like it's time for them to move on. But with Ron Rivera, there was nothing but praise and almost like it was almost like a mourning period this team had. I think that actually contributed to their losing their 4 games after he left because a lot of players just appreciated everything he did for them. I remember back in, 2013, he was coming off 2 straight losing seasons. They started with a 1-3 or 0-3 record, and there was rumors that he would get fired in the bye week. But Ron moved his office down next to the locker rooms. We had 2 offices, one upstairs, but one down there because he felt like he had separation from the players, and he really was losing touch with what's going on in the locker room. And that really started that turnaround. That team won, I think, 8 straight games after that. And they finished 12-4, won an SEC South, and they won it 3 straight years. So players love him to death and what he does. Greg Olson, I know it's a long answer here, but Greg Olson went on and on about what losing Ron Rivera meant to him and talked about how he went through all his text messages from Ron. And he said not one single one of them included football. They were all about his family. And Ron will create that family atmosphere, the culture. He always brought his wife around the team. Some people criticize him for that, but he wanted to see how important it was for players to see how his relationship is with his wife, how he treated her. So, again, I think he's a complete package, and the Redskins are getting a really good coach.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've heard that what you were talking about with the players and how he gets to know them. Josh Norman had talked about that up here. And you know how, like, when people hear, oh, he's a player's coach, some people, some fans automatically dismiss it, oh, he's too lenient, he's too this or that. I didn't get the sense from talking to Josh that that's how it was. It was more that they just appreciated that he got to know them as more than just a player.
Exactly. And Ron was a player himself. I mean, he played for the 85 Bears that won the Super Bowl. And he's always referring back to his time with them. And Mike Dick has been a big influence on his career. And I tell you what, one person that's really made a big influence on his career is John Madden. The former owner, Jerry Richardson, I think, got them together back when the team was struggling. And Ron always believed in having some former head coaches to mentor him. And he said he learned a lot from John Madden and everything that he went through all his personal experiences. And again, he feels strongly about, for especially young coaches, having another head coach on the on his team to help out. I think that's one reason he brought in North Turner, a guy he was working under at San Diego, to help him out when they're trying to turn things around here, not just for what he could do offensively, but what he could bring as far as experience and advice and things like that. He's that's one of the recommendations he's given people like Sean McDermott when they started their staff, is to make sure you hire somebody that has that experience. If you have none, then it's really a tough haul.
Yeah, and I think, you brought up Del Rio's name, so I'm sure that plays into that thinking. But let's go back to the time when he was almost fired. You said he moved his office down by the locker room. How do you think that directly helped? Do you remember anything that he learned from doing that, or that the players saw from that contributed to that turnaround?
I think it was big in a lot of ways. I mean, first it showed that he cares about them, and he got to know them as people, not just football players. And he also was more in touch with what was going on in the locker room. He would, players felt more free to come into his office and tell him what was wrong, and he could give them advice there. And he would also, like at the end of the season, he would go out with a handful of key players, the key leaders on the team, and just have a very open, frank discussions about what they saw went wrong during the season, or what they saw as positive, and how they can make things better for the next year. So he's all in on being a player's coach, and I think that was really key to the success he had here. And I know the big stickler for him was when a lot of people, including myself, have written how he never had back-to-back winning seasons.
Right.
But he believes in that 7-8-1 job he did back in 2014 when they were
right.
4 games ago. They looked like they were hopeless, and they won their final 4 games in a weak division, obviously. But they made the playoffs, and he thinks that should count. He actually thinks that might be one of his better jobs at coaching. So he feels like you got to credit him for getting the playoffs 3 straight years, winning the division 3 straight years, and 4 out of 5 at one point. So he did bring some stability to this organization. I think the change was made more than anything because they had 2 straight bad years, and David Tepper, the new owner, really just wanted to get his own person in there. And another thing on that, I haven't really mentioned this, but analytics is big for David Tepper. He wants a guy that's going to be big into that. And while Ron believes in analytics to a degree, he also believes a lot with your gut feeling and what you've gotten from years of experience. And that's what he relies on more than what just raw numbers say.
Yeah, and that's as you know, like that's become a big thing. But that's why I think like former players do rely on more than just those numbers. And so that's interesting to note, sir. The other thing is too, a big part of coming here is going to be developing Dwayne Haskins. How did you see him work with Cam Newton? I've always heard that he was always very high on him, but how did you see that relationship develop and how he handled Cam?
He was all in on Cam Newton. I know Cam had a show All In with Cam Newton one time, so a little pun there. But Ron was Cam's biggest supporter. He believed in him in every aspect of what he could do. I mean, it's funny because you get the Ravens that are credited with like, hey, we came in here and we got Lamar Jackson and we adapted to what he does best, and that's really innovative. Well, you know what? That's what Ron Rivera did with Cam Newton back in 2011. I mean, their staff didn't have a lot of expertise on the read option and now the RPOs and all that, but they brought in people that could do that or just guide that and expand on what Cam did at Auburn, and pretty much kind of what they're doing at the Ravens now with Lamar Jackson. So Cam wasn't nearly as fast as Lamar Jackson, but you go back and look at him through his first 5-6 seasons when he was completely healthy. He didn't run around people like Lamar Jackson, but he ran over people. You saw defensive play, and it's a shame people forget just how good that guy was.
Yeah, it is funny you bring that up because the Redskins obviously went to the heavy zone read in 2012 with Robert Griffin III, and people started crediting them for it. But I remember going to cover a game in Carolina in 2011, and the Panthers using that 6-7 times a game, but highly effective because you get Cam 1-on-1 out in space against a defensive back, and that's a W for him. And how I do remember it wasn't as prevalent as what the Redskins did with Griffin, but it was definitely a part of their game.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Griffin did a lot of freelancing out there and got a lot of his run yards that way. But most of his yardage back then was off the design runs, and it got more and more as they got comfortable with what they were doing with him. And I think you'll see Ron come in with a similar approach. It's going to be interesting to see who he hires as his offensive coordinator. I don't know what you got on that yet. I guess Norv Turner could be available if he would have wanted to turn that direction and keep doing that. Norv's more of an RPO guy than he is the read option. But it was funny when we kept thinking that Norv Turner was going to cut back on Cam's running when he got here a couple of years ago. I think it was the first game against Dallas. Cam, I can't remember the exact number. I think he ran like 11 times in the first game. And we're basically, Norv said, you just play to the guy's strength. And that's what Ron and the coaches are really good at playing the player's strengths.
So when you look at the last several years, was it just the injuries to Cam Newton that held this franchise back? I mean, because like I said, everybody I've talked to about Ron Rivera, yourself and others, Josh Norman, but even people, who have worked within the organization and other people around the league, they all rave about him. So was it just the injuries? What else maybe held that team back from having more success under him?
I think the injuries did play a big role. I mean, remember last year they were 6-2 and had some big wins against some good teams,
right.
And they looked like they were going to be definitely a playoff team and maybe one of the better teams in NFC. And then Cam's shoulder and that win over the Eagles where he had to throw like 21 times in the fourth quarter to engineer a comeback to beat the Eagles on the road. That put a lot of pressure on that shoulder that they just never – it got weaker and weaker and weaker, and it really hurt them. Then they lost 7 straight, and they had to finally shut down Cam for the last 2 games. And, yeah, and that – if you could fault Ron for one thing is that they decided to rely on young quarterbacks to replace Cam if he got hurt. And instead of, Derek Anderson for years was the guy that would come in.
Right.
And Derek Anderson was a guy that they felt very comfortable with and could come in and engineer some wins. I think back in what season was that? I guess it was a 2014 maybe season where Derek Anderson had to play in 2 games, an opener and another game. Both of them happened to be against Tampa Bay. It was bad, but they won both games because they had a guy that was capable of stepping in and playing there. So I think that was probably one of the faults Ron had there. They really felt like it was time to develop a young quarterback down the stretch, but the problem there was you just had no insurance for a situation like they had last year and again this year. And while, they got off to a good start when they made the quarterback change and went to Kyle Allen. I think they won their first 4 and 5 of the first 6, and they were 5-3 again this year, but it just all kind of fell apart. More injuries happened. I mean, their defensive front, if you look at what Ron did, I think they were at the top of the league most of the year, and I'm not sure if they finished number 1 or not in sacks, but the defense was playing really well, really lights out. There was one point where they were like on pace to tie the Bears sack record, which actually was set in '84, the year before they had the Super Bowl shuffle in that terrific year. So I think Ron's one of the better defensive minds in the league, and that's why he got the job at Carolina back in 2011. So they're really getting a strength there. I thought it was probably too much for him to be the head coach and the defensive play caller. I think that kind of showed me the weakness that they had in the staff after losing several key members over the years. And I think that was an impact. But this year they were playing without Pro Bowl defensive tackle and end because they went to a 3-4. K1 Short, then Terry Poe, another Pro Bowl player, got hurt. So that was 2 big bodies up front that hurt them. And when you lose 2 Pro Bowl players up front, it's hard to replace that and be consistent.
Sure. And, you said that they went to a 3-4, but primarily he's been more of a 4-3 coach is what I think people are expecting up here. What have you liked about and I know there have been some different defensive coordinators, but he is a defensive guy, as you said. So what have you liked about their defensive style?
He got a lot of it from Jimmy Johnson that coached with the Eagles when he was with them, and he really believes, and part of it too is back when he was playing under Buddy Ryan as well with the Bears, and both of those guys were defensive geniuses. So he learned a lot, and he learned that the key is you got to pressure that quarterback. You got to find different ways to do that and be really innovative with that. And I think he's done a good job of that over the years. I think the switch to the 3-4 made a lot of sense with what they had talent-wise coming back, and part of him was he thought teams had kind of figured out some of the things they were doing over that first 7 or 8 seasons. It was time to make a change and mix things up a little bit. So, and I think it was working until the injuries kind of took their toll. And, and without Cam and having to rely on a young quarterback when they did fall behind, not being able to make the comebacks was really a lot of pressure. But again, this team, before Ron was let go, they had a chance to win at Green Bay. It came down to the final play there on the road, and Christian McCaffrey was stopped, I think, right there, a couple of inches from the goal line
Right.
from having a chance to tie it. And they had some really chance. I think it's a lot of chance. You'll hear Ron say this after most games, and it was kind of funny. He brought a T-shirt with his words on it to his final press conference here. But missed opportunities. He really harps on missed opportunities. And you go back to their second game against Tampa Bay, where Cam was ineffective. They had a chance to win that game on the last play, right down inside the 2-yard line. They had another game where they had a chance to win. So if they could have turned one of those games around and won it, who knows what would have happened. But unfortunately for Ron here, at least it all kind of fell apart.
Yeah, and I think the Redskins are probably happy that it did, and they kind of contributed that too by beating them in his last game with the Panthers, and so maybe they got their coach by beating the Panthers. So
I would say that kind of sped up the process because David Tepper was going to make a change anyway. But David Tepper hates to lose. He talked about after they were embarrassed by the Falcons a few weeks before that at home. They said, I was up twice during the night. I couldn't sleep. It was just driving me nuts. And then they turned around with an embarrassing loss to a Washington team at home that really wasn't very good. And
no,
I think that just sped up his process. He said, I'm just going to go ahead and part ways, let Ron go ahead and get an early jump on what team he might land with. And David Tepper had nothing but praise for Ron at the very end. He still thinks he's a good coach. He just felt like he needed to make a change.
And a new ownership that happens. You have experience, Jack Del Rio. What is your experience like with him, and what do you think of him?
Well, first of all, he had a pretty good talent around him because he got to use number 2 pick to get Julius Peppers
Right.
in one of his first years. So he had some stars on that team. Dan Morgan was a player on that. They had some really good players, and they turned that thing around really quickly. And they went from one of the worst defensive teams in the league in 2000. What was it, 2001? To by 2003, they were one of the best teams. And he too is that aggressive style. He'll use a lot of different formations and blitzes and things because he believes in pressuring the quarterback. So I think he and Ron, their philosophies will be a really good mix.
The last thing here, because you covered Josh Norman as well, and there's a lot of speculation on Josh Norman's future here. He's got 1 year left. He does have the experience with Rivera. What did Rivera think of him? And that's first part. And then the second part of that is, are you surprised at how it went for Josh Norman in Washington?
I'll answer the first part. Yeah, I'm a little surprised, but not overly surprised because Josh is a guy that if you've got all the other pieces around him, that he can be outstanding. And I'm not saying he can't be a shutdown corner on his own, but for most of what Carolina did, where he became that star player and the top paid cornerback in the league, they had a lot of pieces and they all played well together. And if you look back at Josh, and this was really unique with Josh, he came in his rookie year, a low round draft pick, and they threw him right into the fire. Well, he had that knack for being a little bit out of control sometimes, just freelancing a little bit, playing with his eyes too much. And I think in the 11th game, he did a little bit of that against Kansas City. Ron Rivera sat him down, and Josh Norman basically disappeared from playing time for a year and a half. And Ron was patient with him because he believed in him. They worked with him. And by that 2015 season, when they went 15-1, reached the Super Bowl, and Josh exploded on the scene in the Pro Bowl and everything, Josh had become a leader in the locker room, a star on the field. And, I know the Redskins, with that cap number that Josh is going to have, they may have, if Ron keeps him, which I think he'll try, they'll probably have to do some restructuring or that. But I think Josh will be and Ron together. I think that'll be a good fit because Ron knows what Josh can do, and Josh really appreciates Ron Rivera. And I think that'll be a good starting point for him building that defense like he wants to do it. And it's funny, I talked to James Bradbury, the guy that replaced Josh Norman here, wore the same number, 24, and really has been one of the best cornerbacks in the league that doesn't get a lot of publicity. I mean, the jobs he's done on Michael Thomas and guys like Julio Jones have been unbelievable. So I was asking him when they were cleaning out the locker room, I said, you want to come back here? And he said, yeah, but I got to look out for myself and get the best deal. And I said, well, Ron Rivera is going to Washington. And he just smiled and, yeah, that's my man. So still, these players love Ron Rivera. So I don't know if that fully answered what you were asking, but I think that Ron and Josh would be a good combination if it could work out financially.
David, awesome stuff. And I know people are going to enjoy hearing your insights. So I greatly appreciate your time as always. And I know you got a few things to worry about on that with that team. So I appreciate you taking some time out.
I enjoyed it. And if you got any tips on who the next coach of this team is going to be, let me know. I've got a few ideas out there. I know Josh McDaniels on their list. I heard there's some interest in Josh coming here, and they're going to interview the Kansas City offensive coordinator this week. You got Matt Rule from Baylor that there's some interest in. So they're going offensive-minded for the first time in team history. They've always hired defensive-minded coaches since '95 when the Panthers started. Everyone they've had has been a defensive mind. So I think there's going to be an offensive mind coming up here.
Well, it'll be interesting for next season for both of us. So, David, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you next year when Ron Rivera's on the other side.
There you go. After this break, I'll be back with Mike Jones from USA Today to discuss the latest moves and what others around the NFL think of what the Redskins are doing. And, of course, we talk about Bruce Allen. Welcome back. Now, here's my conversation with Mike Jones. Now I'm bringing in my guy, Mike Jones from USA Today. Mike, as always, a lot of stuff's going on here. And there's other words I would use for it other than stuff, but there's a lot of stuff. But the things we know is that Bruce Allen is out and Ron Rivera is going to be coming in. So let's start with Bruce Allen. We've both been around this franchise for a long time. We both heard a lot of things with him. Are you surprised ultimately that he is gone?
It almost felt like this day was never going to come. And Bruce was such a master at selling himself and finding a scapegoat, and he was very durable. And I respect his survival skills, even though he's a conniving person. But from what I could gather, there were people, head coaching candidates, who were very hesitant and leery of coming here. Even if Bruce had been moved to just the business side, they still questioned whether or not he was going to still have the ear of Snyder or if he was going to stick his fingers back into things, because they had seen that, okay, Mike Shanahan was supposed to be in charge. Bruce wiggled his way into that. Scott McCloughan was running the show. Bruce really was in charge there, and he just continued to ascend in power. So people were very hesitant, and I think because of that, Snyder, maybe he did intend to move him, but when he got wind of that, he understood, okay, I've got to make a clean break. I've got to give whoever the guy that's giving me the best chance to turn this franchise around as a head coach, I've got to give him what he wants and not worry about my allegiances of the past.
And it's funny you say that, because I heard that about coaching candidates. I've also heard about the GM candidates too, that you're not going to get someone in here that if Bruce Allen is still here, because their feeling was people who have worked here, as you know, would say they can't see him staying away from things. And but the funny thing is, I hear the same about Dan Snyder. Now it's his team, but he likes to inject himself too. But I did hear about GM candidates, but it still signals for Dan. I think it had to have been somewhat of a hard move because Bruce has been really tight with him, and then Larry Hess, trainer, another guy who's been very tight with Dan. I just wonder if I guess it seems like Dan Snyder finally got that something really needed to change here.
Yeah, I think that when he came out there every Sunday and looked around that stadium and saw how few Redskins fans were there and the number of visiting fans, I think that the outcry, he really realized he had to do something drastic. I think that maybe he still thought he could get away with doing it his way, and not being as drastic. But then once hearing from people that he was interested in, like you said, not just head coaches, front office people as well, and talking to people in the league. I know there were conversations with league people, and he got the understanding, and he conveyed that he understood he needed a franchise reset. And, people weren't sure, okay, does that franchise reset mean a full reset like you should, or is he going to try to find a way to still hold on? Well, it came down to him doing that reset. Bruce Allen out, like you said, Larry Hess out, and we'll see what other changes follow. But it everything I can gather, he's willing to give this head coach what he wants. And if this guy says, I want this, or I want that, or I want this guy to come with me, it sounds like Snyder's receptive to that.
Yeah, and I think that's clearly what it signals that he did know. And I think you're, like you said, I don't think you're going to get a guy like Rivera unless you're going to promise him a bunch of stuff that he can, because coaches like power and money, right? I mean, that's
Right.
a lot of the stuff they want. So if you can get that in a place like here, and he's also a guy who likes a challenge from what I'm told, which is good because this is a challenge, but that's the stuff that's going to put you over the top. And it did sound like even over the weekend, you're hearing stuff like maybe he would stay in that other role. So I wonder if there was a late push by Rivera's side to say, you've gotten to this point, but I can't do it unless you do this.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's what I wonder was. What about
Yeah.
with Rivera? Do you think he's enough with these moves, just these couple moves? Is that enough to change the perception of this place, do you think?
I don't think entirely. From what I have gathered, there's still some skepticism. Obviously, he is well respected as a coach. There's no question about that. But people are still wondering, okay, what is the power structure going to be like?
Right.
Because if Snyder is not going to give his head coach full power, or if they're not going to get a smart football mind in here who is aligned philosophically with the head coach, then you're not really set up for change. If Rivera comes in here and say that he does bring in another guy to the front office to help a talent evaluation, I'm not saying he cleans house with the Redskins front office, but even if he kept Eric Schaefer, Doug Williams, all those guys, and bring somebody else in, you then get the indication that, okay, this is a new day. There is a willingness to fully change. Right now, it's like, okay, good step in getting Rivera, but what's next? And that's something that's going to take some time before people feel, okay, that they can, pass judgment on whether or not this is enough to spark a true turnaround.
The people I've talked to about Rivera like him a lot, and whether it's players, I've talked to other people in the league about him. I haven't heard a lot of bad things, but I'm sure you were probably talking about him to more people because there were so many jobs or several jobs that would be open. What were you gathering on him?
That he wasn't going to be out of work for long, that he was going to have options. That's why I'm kind of surprised that he is coming here, just because of the fact that if he had waited, I think other teams that were going to be on board and coming after him. But as we know, Dan Snyder is master at selling, and when he locks in on a guy, he knows how to close the deal. So whatever he told Rivera, and I'm sure his agent did some homework on potential, job situations and who would, be in charge and what kind of freedom Rivera would have, and whatever he heard from the Redskins made him confident enough that he didn't have to wait. And so everybody I talked to, he's a guy that it stresses character, discipline, accountability, trust, hard work, dedication. Those are all the building blocks of his philosophy, and he knows how to assess a player's strengths and figure out how to tap into that and then pull more out of the guy. That's everything that people have told me about him. And also as a former player, he understands.
Right.
And I think that helps him command respect as well. And so that's why so many people looked at those last 2 years in Carolina and said his most important player was not on the field,
Right.
or was not fully healthy. And so they didn't hold that against him, but they felt like he came in here, took a team that was 2-14, had him in the playoffs a couple years later, got him to the Super Bowl. There were always some deficiencies talent-wise as far as the weapons that they gave Cam Newton until they got Christian McCaffrey, but still the wide receiver position was something. And, maybe now this is the first time that he is going to have, last say on personnel. Maybe they gave him optimism that, okay, now in this type of situation, I can get a team over the hump.
Is it good for a coach to have all that power?
I think that if he has a guy in the front office that he very much trusts and respects, that they can give a little pushback, and you can really look at the full spectrum and make smart decisions. Some guys, not every head coach is able to handle that, and then you have some guys that are. And I feel like for Rivera, although he doesn't have the experience, I think if he is armed with a smart football mind that shares his philosophies, and they know and trust each other very well, he'll be okay. A lot of head coaches will be like, look, I'm the one coaching this team. I want to have input on who I'm working with, what coaches. But it takes a mature guy leader. And from everything I can gather, he is one of those. Nobody was on the same page at the same pace in lockstep. I think with Rivera, you're going to see an organization, a locker room that has the tone set by their head coach, and they're all working, I'm not, maybe if it's not absolute perfection, but they are working towards a common goal in a similar manner. And so I think that's one of the big things. The discipline and the uniformity and leadership is what Rivera will bring.
What do you got coming up on the Football Jones podcast?
I'm going to talk about some of the hirings and firings. Did a little bit on that last time, and then,
Right.
going to revisit now that Rivera is official, and then also turn attention to the playoff games because, got some intrigue that'll be happening this weekend here.
Good deal, Mike. I appreciate you joining me, as always. After this break, I'll share my thoughts on the Ron Rivera move, what I heard from people who worked with him in Carolina, and what the firings of Bruce Allen and Larry Hess signal. Well, now I have a few thoughts on this hire, and bear with me because there'll be a couple of them here, but I think you're going to want to hear these. First of all, this is a terrific hire. You heard what David and Mike said about Rivera, and it's what I've heard from anyone I've asked. I spoke with someone who knows him well in Carolina, worked with him, and I told him, I want to know what he thought of Rivera. What are the Redskins getting? And he quickly said, he's a frickin' awesome coach. He loved his motivational skills. It's not like he was out there always shouting away. That's not motivation. When I asked this person for an example of his motivational skills, he said that he went back to the fact that he spent a lot of time getting to know the players as more than just players. He figured out what made them tick, and that's how he would get through to them. Now, that method isn't always going to work. Clearly, Rivera had five full losing seasons in Carolina. You can attribute those to whatever you want, but it's not like they were always winning. But it is something that he does well, and it's why that players always say he gets the most out of his guys. You heard that over and over and over again. Rivera is not Joe Gibbs. Let's make that clear, of course. But this person said that skill reminded him of a guy like Gibbs. It's not as if players were here walking around wondering if Jay Gruden cared about them or not, and that's why they didn't play as well for him or whatever. It's not about that. Players like that, Gruden would engage the back-end players as well as the stars. But for me, it suggests a coach who takes that extra step. And I've long thought that extra step was missing here. All right, let's go on to the next one. The hiring of Jack Del Rio as a defensive coordinator, which was not finalized when I spoke with David for this podcast. Now it is. I think this is a fantastic move as well. I'll go more into depth on him in a later podcast, but I'll say this for now. One person who played the game and remains involved in the NFL has always told me, look at the track record of a guy, especially as a coordinator. Well, Del Rio's track record is damn good. He's been a DC for 4 years, in 4 years, and in 3 of those years, his teams finished top 5 in either points or yards allowed. He improved those Ds dramatically in his first year. The last time the Redskins finished top 5 in either of those categories was in 2008. They've been trying to build a decent defense for a decade, and they failed. Last year at this time, the Redskins interviewed a handful of defensive coordinator candidates. None of them wanted the job. I know some were telling people that this was an odd process. They didn't trust working here. It was a goofy process, talking to guys while the defensive coordinator, Greg Minuski, was still in the building, for God's sakes. It was a terrible way to operate. And some of their hesitancy was about Jay Gruden's job status, but it was just the overall vibe too. Now, well, they just hired Del Rio, a highly accomplished coordinator. Another good move for the Redskins. And so that leads to the next one. Give owner Dan Snyder a credit for these moves so far. They were good and necessary and will help change the culture in this building. It's not as if, and I'm going to go back to the firings now. It's not as if the players felt about Bruce Allen the same way the fans did. Some liked him because their interactions with him were good. He also brought a lot of guys here, and money buys loyalty. I don't celebrate anyone's firing. It's not like I had some great relationship with Allen, but I felt like he did respect me. For example, I spoke with him on the phone for about 40 minutes earlier this season for the story that Jason Reed and I wrote this past week about what went wrong during his tenure. He answered every question and could have just blown it off. Now, he wasn't always going to give you the answers you wanted, which the only answer you guys ever wanted, it was, quote, I suck and I should be fired. Short of that, and I get it. I know you guys are frustrated, and I don't blame you. But I'm just telling you that not everybody would do that, and I respect the fact that he did. Also, a few years ago, when ESPN laid off some workers in the spring, one of the calls I got was from Bruce Allen. He wanted to make sure that my job was safe. And I always appreciated that. It didn't mean I thought he was great. Didn't mean I didn't fail to see everything else, and it didn't change my approach. But I did appreciate it. And so I just want to share that with you because sometimes you just want to share that. Anyway, I definitely talked to other people who did not like him or respect him and felt he had no pulse in the locker room. And he therefore had no idea what or who fit in there. Also, the firing of athletic trainer Larry Hess was necessary as well. Again, not every interaction that he had with guys was bad. I do know some players who liked him until they needed to get a lot of treatment. Then their opinion often changed. I heard that from several guys. And again, it wasn't unanimous. Nothing ever is. But this was some of the stuff you'd hear over the years. It was a lax atmosphere in the trainer's room. It was a lax atmosphere kind of overall. And too many guys, I don't feel like, took it seriously. Even some big name guys didn't take it as seriously as they should. And that frustrated other players. That's not just always on the trainer staff, mind you. That's on guys being responsible for their own treatment and getting in there. So, and I've mentioned this in the past, but it's not something I harped on. Maybe I should have more. I don't know. But it is, I'll just say this. When I covered Gibbs' second stint, you knew that the building was all about football. The staff was about football. The goal was to win. Didn't always do so clearly, but you knew that's what drove people, including the trainers like Bubba Tyre when he was here. I can't say the same of late. I think they wanted to win. I don't think they were driven to win, because if they were, I think they would have had a more detailed approach. And when you are, you're much more in tune with those details. And I view the trainer's room as a big part of that detail. It needs to be taken seriously. And that means not only does it take it seriously by the play, it's by everybody. That's by the higher ups. When they take it seriously, it trickles down to the coaching staff, and the coaching staff then gets it to the trainer's room, and the trainers then have the players get it like that. So it's just a trickle-down effect. I'm not just blaming Larry Hess for all that by any means, but I do think that it's something that has to improve. The Redskins under Allen and Snyder didn't do that enough. Now, they need to hire someone good and add more trainers as well. Get more beds in there so players don't have to wait on treatment, and that's been a problem too. That's not on the trainers. That's on the organization having been, to be honest, cheap in some of those areas, and again lacking the details. So I don't know. The other part is I don't know yet what this means for Trent Williams. I know when I spoke with him a few weeks ago and I told you this, he wouldn't rule out a return under this scenario. He also knew they were still far apart in some of the details. But we'll see what happens here. I think that's a stay tuned situation as well. Another one. But these moves also suggest where Snyder is at with wanting to win. Allen and Hess were two of his trusted guys that he liked to hang out with. I think you know what that means. For all the talk about Snyder's penchant for change early in his tenure and being volatile with that, I felt recently he's hung on to people and players for too long, especially if he likes them. He wanted to have fun owning the team. It can't have been fun lately for him. Too much losing, bad press, empty seats. Finally, he clearly asked what's best for the franchise. Cleaning houses, and he's doing it. He deserves kudos for that. You might think it's easy to fire these people, but these were his guys. And I think the same is true of Eric Schaffer, if he indeed leaves in May after the draft has been speculated, whatever. Schaffer is a trusted lieutenant, and a couple of people I talked to earlier this week were shocked that he might not return. He's good at what he does. If these guys aren't safe, then there are zero people in the building who should feel secure. At least the holdovers. Clearly, the new coaches, Ron Rivera, should feel pretty secure for now. Will this work? I don't know. I know that Rivera will have Gibbs-like power in the organization. I don't know yet if that's good because it doesn't always work for coaches. It's difficult. The key is who comes into the football ops side and how they work together. I know some of the people mentioned as candidates like Louis Riddick, Morocco Brown. I don't know Rick Smith. But I know the first two would be good from this standpoint. They understand and respect the chain of command, and they won't go leaking stuff if they disagree with the move. Riddick has been in the media, but he was not a talker before he entered this realm. He was here a long time when I was covering the team. He never talked. My point is that too often in the past what happened here was this. There would be a division over who they wanted to draft or sign. And if it was a non-football guy making the move, Allen or Snyder, then you'd eventually know because others didn't want to be saddled with that mistake. That leads to division and leaks and the circus that always seemed to engulf the place. I know some are skeptical it'll ever work under Snyder. They're skeptical he can stay away. I was told by one former staffer that Snyder would funnel his desires through guys like Allen or Schaffer. Well, he's lost those guys. I don't know who his trusted guys will be now. On New Year's Eve, I had a former player call me up and say, I told you he just wants to win. Perhaps this is the time he's figured out the right way to do so. Stay tuned. That's it for now. Thank you to David Newton from ESPN and Mike Jones from USA Today, as well as the Football Jones podcast, for joining me. Give Mike's podcast a listen. It's really good. And thank you for listening. It's not just a new year, Redskins fans. It's a new day. Enjoy it and talk to you soon.